imagine I had opulent parents with houses all over the place.
Exactly.
I just get confused because I get confused about what the point of taxation is. What is the where are the sluice gates of taxation as things go in and out of superannuation? So if a parent wants to give super to a child, don't they have to pass through a taxable event when they withdraw it from their super and put it into the child's super? You can't go from a parent's super to a child's super without it being taxed.
No, but you can go from cash.
That cash got taxed.
That cash got taxed. But once you send the super, you can buy the Woolworths shares with it. And when the Woolworths shares go up and all the dividends come in, then you're in a
This is why Bill Shorten lost the election, because it makes your brain hurt when you start thinking about these complicated things.
Well, I'm just saying I think it's starting to be clear that when they're talking about changes, that they are keen on changes.
You're reading between the lines. You're reading the tea leaves.
It's at the top end. It's not at the average. Going to talk to Anne Hollins about talking about your dad. And everyone's dad and mum. Can you be a great parent if you've had bad parenting yourself? And how do you achieve that? It's often said that the main model for people's parenting is the way they were parented themselves. What happens if you grew up in a pretty dysfunctional household? How do you make that transition and make sure you are a much better parent? You're a better parent than the parenting you received.
You definitely can do that. I reckon my parents were great parents because they had terrible parents.
Yeah, well, that's right, and that's
didn't want to repeat the mistakes.
Exactly right. So that's a midweek conference at 5:30.
Fantastic. Thanks, Richard Glover. Up after the news headlines. I'll see you tomorrow.
Get ready to sparkle at Mardi Gras 2023 with me, Christine Arnoux. Join me live on Saturday on ABC Radio's National Weekend Evenings.
All right, let's get our feathers on.
Celebrate the spirit of love and glitter with us as we bring you the festivities of this year's Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras.
Go wild, baby.
Mardi Gras 2023, live on Saturday from 7 p.m. here on ABC Radio Sydney.
Good afternoon, Adam Story with an ABC News update. Her child is among those taken to hospital after a multi-vehicle crash on the Great Western Highway in the Blue Mountains. Police say the accident involved a truck and 6 cars. 6 other people have been taken to hospitals across Western Sydney, including one man with serious injuries. The Prime Minister says Australians with average super balances would not be affected by any suggested change to super tax concessions. The Treasurer Jim Chalmers has this week questioned whether the system is sustainable, pointing to figures that suggest concessions will cost more than the age pension by around 2050. The first home buyback offers have been made to flood-affected residents in the Northern Rivers region. The Northern Rivers Reconstruction Corporation says it aims to make offers to the first 250 residents by the end of April. More than 50,000 regional apprentices, trainees and students are now eligible to get a $250 rebate on their travel costs. Apprentices and students based in regional areas and aged between 16 and 66 can now apply for the $250 travel card through Service New South Wales. The state government has announced it will expand its affordable IVF initiative to include egg freezing if re-elected. The procedure generally isn't covered by Medicare and can cost around $10,000 per cycle. Aid organisations say the recovery from the earthquakes that have hit Turkey and Syria over the past fortnight could take up to 5 years. The death toll from the quakes that struck 2 weeks ago is now more than 47,000. At least 8 people were killed in the most recent tremor. Meanwhile, food drops to isolated communities in New Zealand are still being delivered by air as authorities work to urgently repair hundreds of kilometres of damaged roads, and communities in New Zealand are bracing for more wet weather, particularly in the Hawke's Bay region. And the National Rugby League has cancelled its annual season launch as negotiations between the league and players continue over a new collective bargaining agreement. Tensions between players and administrators have been building as the men's league counts down to round 1, which starts on Thursday next week. Showers easing in Sydney this afternoon, partly cloudy tomorrow, the slight chance of a shower, a top of 25. More news at 4.
You're listening to Drive with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
G'day, Richard Glover with you on ABC Radio Sydney. Today, the PM promises no big changes with superannuation, but what of the 80,000 accounts with balances of over 2 million? Do they still remain in his sights? Also today... the push to heat-proof our cities, and a visit to the place that's leading the charge. That's Self-Improvement Wednesday, and a little later, everywhere. Let's check the traffic.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
And Jeff Wallace is here from the Australian Traffic Network. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. Now, we've heard about a serious crash in the mountains, Wentworth Falls. It has shut down the Great Western Highway both ways between Lura Mall and Scott Avenue. Audley Weir, that's shut down with flooding, so to the Wakehurst Parkway between North Narrabeen and Oxford Falls. Also, Tempe, a crash just clearing now off the Princess Highway, Tempe Bridge. I'm Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network.
Jeff, thank you very much.
You're with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
Coming up, are you one of those frustrated people who've got some money in a deposit account and just are amazed at how little you are being paid compared to the amount that's coming out from, say, a credit card account or a mortgage account? There seems to be obviously there's going to be a gap between those two things. I understand that. That's how banks make their profit. But there's research out today that suggests that the gap is much bigger than it used to be. Say 5 years ago, the gap used to be much smaller. We're going to talk to Peter Martin about how the banks are managing to get away with charging people such increasing amounts for things like mortgages and credit cards and personal loans, and yet on deposit accounts giving so little. In terms of the transaction accounts, which represent, in terms of the Commonwealth Bank, for instance, 1 in 7 accounts of these transaction accounts, or at least 1 in 7 of the dollars held by the banks are in these transaction accounts. The interest rate is, let me count. Oh, yes, 0. How can that be? Peter Martin in just a tick. But the social media sensation energy drink being marketed at Australian children contains 6 times the amount of caffeine as a can of Coca-Cola. There are reports today. It's only legal to sell here due to a loophole that allows it to be considered a dietary supplement. This is a product which, according to nutritionists, is actually quite dangerous for children. Catherine Saxelby is a nutritionist and founder of foodwatch.com.au and joins us here on Drive. Catherine, good afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon, Richard. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, that's fine. What can this level of caffeine do to a child's system?
Sorry, you have to repeat it again. I misheard you. You were breaking up.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I'm just wondering, at this level, what does this level of caffeine do to particularly a young person's body?
Oh, well, the amount that most of us can handle is about 300 to 400 milligrams, and a can of Prime Energy drink contains 200 milligrams. So I think you're already halfway there. You're already at your maximum amount. You're at your amount, even if you had after one can. So I don't think it's anywhere near. It's not safe enough to recommend to footballers and trainee and kids under the age of 18.
How can there be a loophole that has a limit on the amount of caffeine, and yet if you call it something different, if you call it a dietary supplement, you can do whatever you like?
I don't know. It's just quite amazing that it would be allowed in because even though if it's called a dietary supplement, I mean, we've had Logan Paul and KSI promoting it on TV all the time. So I don't know how it can come into the country if it's being called just a dietary supplement. I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, it's obviously a commercial drink being advertised in a very unsubtle way. What would it do to a child? Let's say you have a couple of these drinks. What's happening to, I don't know, your blood pressure, your heart rate, all those sorts of things?
Yes, it's very unsafe. They can cause insomnia, upset stomach, heartburn, tachycardia, which is too rapid heart rate, which is what I have if I have 2 cups of coffee, and your mind is always in overdrive. Irritability, over-anxiety and frequent urination. So you don't want to have too much caffeine. I have my caffeine in the morning. I have 1, maybe 2 drinks, and that's about it for the day. And I don't have any after about 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
I mean, one of the ridiculous things about it is if you look on their website, the Prime Energy website, there's a line that says the drink is not suitable for children under 18. And yet if you look at the marketing, if you look at those crowds who turned up to see the 2 stars you mentioned outside the Channel 9 studios, they're all 14-year-olds.
Yes. They're all absolutely mad. They're internet personalities. And KSI is an influencer and Logan Paul is a wrestler, I suppose. Mm-hmm. It's really unbelievable, and a 250 ml can of energy drink such as Red Bull has 80 milligrams in it, and this has 200 grams, And these are big serve size. These are 500 mils. So you would expect to get probably less in 500 mils. You'd expect just to quench your thirst. But, you actually get a lot of caffeine in here as well.
Yeah, and no one would think to give a 14-year-old or a 12-year-old, no one would think, say, sit down at the cafe and have 3 espressos in a row, and yet that's essentially what you're doing.
Yes, exactly. And that's what you do exactly. You don't think about giving them anything with caffeine if they're 14 or 15 or 13 or below that, but you'd happily give them an energy drink. And a lot of people don't drink tea or coffee, and I think the caffeine in coffee and tea is probably natural there, whereas it's added in these energy drinks. So there's something going on with the caffeine that's been added as opposed to caffeine that's there naturally.
In coffee, Catherine Saxelby is here from foodwatch.com.au. I mean, we talk mainly about young people, but if you're in terms of adult consumers, is it a great product for them either?
Sorry, you're breaking up. I missed that question. What did you say at the end?
What about for adults? Do you think if you're
adults?
Yeah, for adults.
Well, I think for adults you might would take it in and see how you go. Most people can handle 300 to 400 milligrams of caffeine a day. That's 4 or 5 cups of instant coffee or 3 shots of espresso, like could be a latte, a cappuccino. They all start with a shot. So that's what most people can handle. So I just think as an adult, you just have to, suck it and see. Have to take the caffeine that's in the energy drink and then see how you feel. Some people are not affected at all by caffeine, and I think those people should be recognised, and we should acknowledge them. So. Anyway, so
okay, but understand
all I was going to say.
If you understand, if you're drinking this product, you're drinking 6 times the amount of caffeine, even in a can of Coke.
Coca-Cola,
wow.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right.
And caffeine comes in lots of places, not just in tea and coffee. It can come in chocolate. It can come in cocoa. In dark chocolate, there's twice as much as in milk chocolate, and even the no-dose stimulant, that truckies take, the stimulants to keep them awake, that has a level of 100 milligrams. So this drink is twice that amount of the no-dose stimulant. So I just don't think it's at all suitable for young children, especially those who are training in sport, and I don't think it's suitable for adults. Adults have to wait and see if they have any effect from the caffeine.
And maybe the loophole in the law has to be changed.
Yes, exactly. So I was saying to your producer before that maybe it's come from New Zealand, because the supplements used to come that way from New Zealand to Australia because there was a loophole. They were produced in New Zealand, but then they could somehow come into Australia. But we couldn't find where these drinks were being produced.
All right, but that might be one of the loopholes that needs to be closed. Hey, Catherine, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah,
Bye now, Richard.
Catherine Saxelby from foodwatch.com.au. What's the appeal of these drinks, particularly to young people? I don't know if you saw the photograph in today's Sydney Morning Herald. It features the scene outside the Channel 9 studios when Karl Stefanovic had these 2 influencers on the Today Show and kind of invited their fans to come down to the studio. It's just this. It's as if the Beatles are there. I mean, it's an absolutely crowded area. I don't know how many people, but hundreds and hundreds of these young people absolutely coming to see their heroes, and no doubt absolutely turned on to the idea of drinking these energy drinks. Quite an amazing scene, especially as the 2 stars of people. Well, I've never heard of them anyway. What's the attraction? Professor Eva Kemps is a psychologist and eating behaviour expert from Flinders University. She did a study on energy drinks and addiction, and she joins us here on The Drive Show. Eva, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
What do the younger people, the 14-year-old boys who seem to be the main market, what do they see in these drinks?
Yeah, like you say, they are the target market, and it is a lot of to do with marketing, and lots of reasons why people drink energy drinks. People talk about it increases their alertness, it helps to combat fatigue. Some people claim that, it helps them to study, it makes them perform better on the sport field, and it's great to mix with alcohol at parties. But I think this trend with the influencers marketing as well, it probably, appeals to a sense of coolness and being part of the crowd and, a sense of fun and being out with friends as well. So it's not so much marketing the drink itself, but the whole experience around the consumption of the drink.
Now, of course, those claims about alertness, up to a point, they're true. Every coffee drinker knows that they're true.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's certainly reasons why people drink them and certainly for the right reasons because, if you're feeling tired and you need to pick me up, if you have a boost of caffeine, whether that is through an energy drink or, a cup of coffee, of course your alertness is going to increase, and it's like with anything, having it in moderation, no problem at all,
Are you surprised by the amount of caffeine in this particular product, in the Prime product?
Yeah, I was stunned when I was told because I knew that Red Bull already had quite a lot of caffeine in it when you compare it to just a cup of coffee, but this is really increasing that amount a lot. I'm not sure why there has to be so much caffeine in it. Like it's not my area of expertise, but it just sounded like wow, that's going to give you a serious hit, isn't it?
Yeah, and you can imagine, heart palpitations to just sleeplessness that night. But that seems to be the product, and it seems to have an appeal in the law at the moment. Anyway, seems to allow it. Eva Kemps, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Professor Eva Kemps, who's done a study on energy drinks and their appeal from Flinders University. It's currently 13 minutes to 4 here on ABC Radio Sydney. Quick check of the traffic if you're battling around Sydney. Here's the very latest.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
Yeah, on the roads, here is the latest. At Wentworth Falls, the Great Western Highway between Lura Mall and Scott Avenue. Multiple vehicles involved in a crash there with significant delays. The highway is closed in both directions. Thanks to a number of listeners too who've told us that it's really backed up a long way there. So watch out at Wentworth Falls, the Great Western Highway between Lura Mall and Scott Avenue. The road closed, the highway closed in both directions. If you're in Bondi Beach, Campbell Parade at Kerr Lewis Street, the lights are flashing yellow. And finally in Normanhurst, Pennant Hills Road at the M1 Pacific Motorway, a car breakdown with one southbound lane closed. That's the latest.
You're with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
You remember this ad?
The Dolomites have arrived from outer space.
We make saving fun and easy, whatever the amount. A Dolomite go further in a Dolomite account at the Commonwealth Bank.
Well, it used to
be
it used to be a very simple proposition when you were young. The Dolomites told you that you could put away a little bit of money into a bank account and that amount would grow via interest into a tidy little nest egg. The whole idea was to teach children the value of saving and of compound interest. But it turns out that it's not so simple. Nowadays, interest rates from the big banks have fallen quite a bit below the cash rate. It's a development that's only a few years old. Peter Martin is a visiting fellow at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University and joins us here on Drive. Peter, good afternoon.
Good day, Richard.
I guess this is something that a lot of listeners would have noticed, the big gap between the interest rates the banks are charging, credit cards, personal loans, mortgages, and the interest rates they are paying out in deposit accounts. Now, we understand there's always going to be a gap between those two things. That's how banks make their profits. But it's such a big gap at the moment.
It's changed. I've graphed, you can see it in the conversation today, get things going back a decade, but I could have graphed going back longer, it'd be the same. Right up until 5 years ago, not only did the deposit rate, and I don't mean, by the way, the rate on transaction accounts, because that fell to 0 years ago, right? Ordinary money you get in a bank account, you don't get nothing and you get charged fees. I mean, accounts where you have a substantial amount of money, the one I used is the online deposit rate, but the others are much the same. Graph that. It used to be that not only did it move exactly with the Reserve Bank cash rate, those announcements, but it was the same. So when which is convenient for people doing calculations, when the cash rate was 3%, that's where the deposit rate was. When the cash rate was 4.5%, that's where the deposit rate was. It fell down. The deposit rate fell right away from about 2018, the 2 years leading into COVID. Right now, it is way below. Now, the cash rate is 3.35%, and you would be lucky to get 1%.
Now, the banks say, oh, no, but, we've got a few accounts where you can get 4%, they say.
Oh, yeah, you can do very well. So long as you don't read the fine print, or if you do read the fine print, you'll find out there's not that much in it. The head of the Bankers Association, Anna Bligh, said, we're giving people 4% now and they could only get 1.6%, after a while. Well, the point is that they could never get that back then and they can't get 4% now. These are introductory rates. This is the trick that electricity companies use, when you switch over. The first 5 months will be discounted. In this case, you'll get 4% for the first 5 months. Then it drops right back. Another trick they use is they call them savings accounts, and you get a high rate. You might get 4%, you might get 3.5%, only if you put more money in each month. 1 month you can't make it, one withdrawal, that's it. You're back to, say, 0.25%. The rates are the ordinary rates, comparing like with like, comparing now with what we used to pay, are far, far lower, whereas the mortgage rates, given the cash rate, they're where they always were.
So how are they getting away with it? If they didn't used to get away with it, if they used to have just a reasonable gap between the amount they were charging and the amount they were taking, why has that gap grown so much bigger?
Did you used to watch the movies, the early ones, the old-fashioned ones? I'm thinking of Mae West. Mae West was asked in one of them, how did you get to be so, oh, goodness, you're rich? You know what she replied? Goodness had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, yes.
Fairness, right? Nothing to do with it. The reason is, I think, and it's not the whole reason, but lately since COVID, they've been laughing. What have we been doing when we've been locked down or not wanting to spend, go out? We've been saving, the peak was about 20% of our income. Massive savings. This is in COVID, the APRA statistics, the statistics in all the banks, show the banks got an extra 300 billion of deposits, right? That's an enormous amount. As well as that, and by the way, they didn't need to compete for that. They didn't need to offer high rates. People were just sort of shoveling the money in. At the same time, early in COVID, the Reserve Bank, it wanted to support the banking system, I guess as it should have, it gave the banks 188 billion of special funding for virtually zero, just money they could use. Now, so if you've got all that money coming in, why do you need to offer a high rate? You've got enough money to lend out. That's what the banks make their money on, lending out. You don't need to offer a high rate. That's part of the reason why the two fell away, why deposit rates fell away from mortgage rates.
Isn't it partly our fault for not, someone's texting in about ING, they're saying have got a pretty good rate at the moment, and I don't know.
Yeah, ING, by the way, I looked at their pretty good rate, and their pretty good rate has so many conditions. You need to use their credit card. You need to, as I said, for the banks, you need to put money in each month. You need to not move money from an ING account, but move it from outside the bank. If their quoted rate is 4% for this account, but the actual rate, the sort of that you fall back to if you don't meet the conditions, is I think 0.5, about half a percent.
Okay. So look at the fine print, and it may turn out there's a great rate being offered, but you have to stand on one leg and go to the moon once a week.
Yeah, they use complexity as a weapon. This is what the ACCC and the Treasurer's asked the ACCC, the Competition and Consumer Commission, to inquire into deposit rates. They're going to do that by the end of the year. The last time they looked into mortgage rates, they were of the view that complexity was used to make it hard for people to switch. And people don't want to switch anyway, because people have the view that if money is in a bank, it's safe. If money is in one of the banks that isn't the big four, that used to be called a credit union or something, maybe it's not as safe. And
that's not true. That's not true, though, Peter, is it? Because the government guarantees it all.
Yeah, they're guaranteed regardless. And this offering you money for the first few months is a way of not paying. It's a loyalty tax, not paying the customers who are sticking with their bank, perhaps because of the Dolomites account. And by the way, the Commonwealth Bank only ever got to Interscores because it was government owned. I'm not sure why it's still there. But people suffer because of loyalty, and retirees, it's different, I think, but I think most of us don't really look at what happens in our deposit accounts.
Yeah, self-funded retirees need to, don't they? Because that's, they're surviving on that money. What about I suppose the only thing you can do is have a term deposit. Now, I know that's a restriction of a sort, because you can't touch your money for the 8 months or the 2 years or whatever you sign up for, but you can still get a good rate, providing you're confident you won't need the money.
Not that good, Richard. Preparing these graphs, I looked at the term deposit rates, and they're quite low too. And when I say quite low, I mean they're quite low if your term of your deposit is a year or a month or 3 months. And I think the reason is the same. The banks are flush with money. They don't need to offer high rates to get it. People have been stashing it in, doubtless, in term deposits during the early years of COVID. I'm not sure what we can do. I do think a few things will make it better. One is that there'll be an inquiry. Banks tend to behave better when they're being looked at. The last inquiry subpoenaed, they have the right to demand 40,000 documents from the 4 banks, which I guess would be 10,000 each, right? So that'll scare the banks. Also, the circumstances that meant money was pouring in are ending. We're taking money out now, right? We're spending on overseas holidays and so on. And that special money that they got from the Reserve Bank, they were 3 years at virtually zero interest rate. The last of them expires midway through next year. So the banks may have to work a bit harder for the money, but it's true, if we did shop around, that would encourage them to work harder.
Can we get that? What he's called, Justice Hayne, the one with the evil gimlet eye? Can we get him to do it again? He said to put the fear of God into them.
Yeah, well, the ACCC is pretty fearsome. It's on the case. Although you have to wonder. So they inquired into mortgages, and they found that there was they didn't use the word collusion. They used the word synchronisation in the bank's movements that was convenient for the banks. And, they talked about the thicket of complexity that makes it hard for people to switch. I'm not sure that much has changed since that report, but I do think the banks might improve their behaviour at least while the inquiry's on, which is for the rest of the year.
Well, we can only hope, and by all means, shop around. And some people on the text are saying that they feel they're doing all right, but they are agreeing with you that it does. There's often some fine print. Now, it might be good rate nonetheless, but someone says, we get a good rate at 4.8%, which is a good rate. I have to meet a couple of conditions, like increase the balance each month, but it's manageable since I can flick money in there from another account at the end of the month. And look, that's fine if you've got a really well-organised system like that and you've always got enough money in the other account. But that's not the reality for most people. They're very likely to not be able to make that payment 1 month, or they forget about it even if they can. And as you say, it's quite interesting that you then tumble. You're not just penalised slightly, you tumble right back to the bottom of the queue, really.
Yeah, it's not very good. And as in so many fields, private health insurance used to be the case with mobile phones, electricity. Complexity is used basically as a weapon against us to stop us changing or to stop us even being able to compare. What we need actually is, and there are such websites, is a really good website that allows us to compare between bank offers for our own circumstances.
Okay, with all that detail that you're talking about. Peter, interesting to talk to you, and we'll just, hope for some change. But in the meantime, check the fine print. Thanks very much for talking to me. Peter Martin from the Australian National University has been writing about this topic today on the Conversation website, where you can see those graphs he's prepared, showing how, go back 5 or 10 years, and it used to be better, but not anymore. Lots coming up on Drive, including the pots and pans and the fears about Teflon, and, well, some good news about that, actually. It's news time now, 4 o'clock.